This is France. If I were to ask you to tell me what languages are spoken there, you might be thinking of French, Occitan, maybe even Basque. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Found in mainly Lower Brittany, and today the only Celtic language on continental Europe, Breton is a language spoken by just over 200,000 people. That's 0.3% of France's population. But how comes you've never heard of it before? Well, to answer that requires a little bit of backstory. You might be surprised to learn that Breton didn't actually originate in France. Rather, it's an insular Celtic language imported from the British Isles, and thus more closely related to languages like Cornish and Welsh. Up to around the 12th century, Breton was the language of prestige, class, elegance. But seeing the ascendancy of the much more influential French, much of the upper classes ditched Breton in favour of French, and in doing so relegated Breton to being the language of the commoner. After this point, Breton literature is extremely limited. Now, when it comes to the protection of minority languages, the French government doesn't exactly have the best track record. You see, during the French Revolution, since it was despised by both the royalists and the revolutionaries, Breton was seen as more of a superstitious inciter of federalism than an actual legitimate language. The situation wasn't helped by the Compulsory Education Act of 1882, which mandated that all teaching be conducted in French, a move which quite effectively marginalized regional languages. For the next few decades, speaking Breton was strictly forbidden, and even within living memory, there are stories of children being punished, ridiculed, and publicly humiliated just for using their language, which, apart from the obvious psychological impact, also reduced the number of Breton speakers significantly, as these children went on to view Breton as a handicap in social promotion, a language only good enough to talk to cows and pigs in. Clearly, the language was, and is still, very much endangered. Even today, this ignorance to minority languages persists. In fact, it wasn't until 1993 when parents were legally allowed to give their children Breton names. And France, rather conveniently, never actually finished ratifying the European Charter for Regional Languages. And, as of the time of this video's creation, Breton has no official status in France. So yeah, the language hasn't exactly had the smoothest ride. But what was it actually like? Well, in terms of grammar, like with most of the Celtic languages, VSO word order is the most common. Breton marks its nouns for gender and number. And unlike most other Celtic languages, there's both definite and indefinite articles. There also exists these so-called inflected prepositions, as well as nominal forms like the diminutive, comparative, superlative, equative, and exclamatory. As for the verbs, in Breton, they're pretty standard. There exists one conjugation, plus a number of irregular verbs, 3 moods, and aspects including the perfect, habitual, punctual, and progressive. And this is the phonology. The uvula R is a result of French influence, but a tapped R still exists in places like Léon, Vaud, and Pays de Pontivy. the Brittany region, since the government had blocked a proposal for Breton schools to be funded by the state, funds Diwan, or Breton language schools, a system established in 1977. Today, over 4,000 pupils study at these Diwan schools, and it's hoped that their attendance gives them both total immersion in the language and the confidence to pass the language on to the next generation. Additionally, many schools in the region also provide bilingual classes in Breton and French. And to really give you a taste of the language, here's the Lord's Prayer in Breton compared to Cornish on the right. Anyway, that's all for this week. If you've enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, subscribing, and don't forget to tune in for next week's episode.